The Bride Who Lied. The late summer sun beat down on the dusty plains of Wyoming, where the golden grasses swayed against the whisper of a dry wind. In the small frontier town of Powder Creek, gossip traveled faster than a prairie fire, and the latest story had the townsfolk clucking like hens at feeding time. Jacob McKenna, a rancher known for his quiet strength and stern reputation, had sent for a mail-order bride. After years of burying himself in ranch work and ignoring the hollow ache in his chest, Jacob finally admitted he wanted companionship. Not just a woman to keep the house, but someone to share the long nights and to help turn his lonely homestead into a real home. The letters had come from back east. Her name was Lillian. She had written with grace, describing her fondness for cooking, reading, and the simple dream of building a life alongside a hard-working man. Her penmanship was delicate, her words heartfelt. Jacob, who had never been a man of many words himself, found comfort in her letters. He sent for her with the promise of marriage the moment she arrived. But when the stagecoach rolled into town that afternoon, Jacob's steely gray eyes widened, not from disappointment, but surprise. Lillian stepped down, aided by the driver. She was elegant in her posture, carrying herself with a dignity that seemed unusual for the dusty streets of Powder Creek. But she was older than she had claimed. Her letters had painted the picture of a young woman in her 20s, yet here stood someone clearly nearer 40. Her auburn hair had threads of silver, her cheeks bore faint lines that spoke of years gone by, and her hands carried the marks of labor. She smoothed her modest traveling dress nervously, knowing the stares that followed her. Jacob tipped his hat politely, his silence stretching as the town held its breath. Finally, he offered his hand. "Mrs. Lillian, I presume?" Her voice trembled but held a trace of pride. "Yes." "Mr. McKenna, I owe you honesty. I wasn't truthful in my letters. I feared no one would want me if I told my real age. I'm 38, not 25. A gasp ran through the crowd. Mail-order brides were always a gamble, but this? It was considered scandalous, even deceitful. Sheriff Dawson leaned against the hitching post, muttering, "Well, I'll be damned. That fella's been swindled." Jacob's jaw tightened. His reputation as a man of honor was being tested. The crowd waited for him to explode, to send her packing, to teach a lesson about lying. Instead, Jacob looked long at her, his expression unreadable. He thought of the nights he'd spent staring at the stars, wondering if he'd die alone. He thought of the letters, the honesty of her words about loneliness, the warmth that had reached him across miles of wilderness. Finally, his deep voice rumbled through the tense air. "You lied about your years, that's true. But years don't matter half as much as the truth of your heart. And your letters, those were truer than most men I've met in this town." The onlookers blinked in shock. Murmurs rippled through them. Jacob stepped forward, offering his arm. "You came all this way. I reckon that means more than numbers on a page. If you'll still have me, I'll keep my promise." Lillian's eyes filled with tears, relief softening her features. She slipped her hand through his arm. The gasps and whispers of the townfolk chased them as they walked toward the church, but Jacob didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt a quiet rightness in his soul. The wedding was small, simple, and whispered about by every gossip in Powder Creek. Some called Jacob a fool, others admired his surprising tenderness. Lillian tried to steady her heart, still fearful he might regret it. But Jacob, though reserved, showed his answer in the way he worked beside her. She was not a burden, she was a partner. She knew how to manage a household, mend clothes, tend chickens, and even help mend fences when the need arose. She was not fragile, she was forged in the fires of hardship, and Jacob found himself respecting her strength more each day. Still, doubts lingered in Lillian's heart. Would he grow resentful? Would the whispers of the town poison what fragile bond they were building? She had risked everything on this chance. And though Jacob's answer had been merciful, She feared that one day mercy would turn to coldness. Yet, one evening under the starlit sky, when she whispered, "Do you ever wish I was younger, Jacob?" he placed his calloused hand over hers and simply said, "I don't need younger. I need true. And you've given me more truth than I deserve." The rancher's answer. The weeks rolled by on the McKenna ranch, and Lillian settled into her new life with the steady rhythm of prairie winds and hard work. At first, she felt every eye upon her. When she went to fetch flour at the general store, the whispers trailed her like shadows. She tricked him. He'll throw her out before long. But Jacob was a man who cared little for gossip. Each day he rose before the dawn, and each day she rose with him, their partnership sealed not just by vows, but by the work they did side by side. He mended fences while she cooked for the ranch hands. She gathered eggs while he broke wild colts. They met in the evenings at the table, tired but content. And slowly, the looks of doubt in town began to change. One afternoon, after driving a herd into the south pasture, Jacob suggested they ride into Powder Creek for supplies. Lillian hesitated. Every trip to town felt like standing trial before the people. But Jacob only said, "Let them talk. We've got nothing to hide." The mercantile bell jingled as they stepped inside. Conversation stopped. The storekeeper, Mr. Greeley, cleared his throat nervously. "Afternoon, Jacob." "Afternoon, Mrs. McKenna." Lillian smiled politely, but her stomach knotted. She busied herself with picking out coffee beans, sugar, and flour while Jacob set a sack of oats on the counter. That was when old Mrs. Halloway spoke up from near the pickle barrels, her voice sharp as vinegar. "Jacob McKenna, the whole town knows you were deceived. What kind of man keeps a wife who lied to his face?" The room went still. All eyes turned to Jacob. He didn't answer at once. He looked at Lillian instead, saw the color drain from her face, the way her hands tightened on the basket. He reached over, steadied her hand with his calloused one, and then turned back to the room. "You want to know what kind of man I am?" His voice was steady, calm, but carried the weight of iron. "I'm the kind of man who knows the difference between lies that harm and lies born of fear." She was afraid no man would take her. Maybe she was wrong to hide her years, but she was right to hope for something better. "And I'll tell you plain, I'd rather have a woman with honesty in her heart and courage in her soul than a girl who never lived a hard day in her life." The silence was absolute. Not even the squeak of the floorboards broke it. Then Jacob's gray eyes swept the room, cold as steel. "So if any of you think she's less of a wife because of her age, you'll have to answer to me." No one spoke. A few men dropped their gazes. Mrs. Halloway muttered something about her preserves needing tending and bustled out the door. Lillian's breath trembled as she whispered, "Jacob!" But he simply lifted the sack of oats, placed it on his shoulder, and offered her his arm. "Come on, Lillian. Let's get home." From that day forward, the gossip died down. Folks still whispered, but not so loud, and never within earshot of Jacob McKenna. The ranch hands who once wondered if she'd last began to respect her. She rose before sunrise, kneading dough with practiced hands, humming softly while the coffee brewed. She worked the garden, canned fruit, sewed patches into shirts worn thin by labor. When the cattle drive came, she surprised them all by riding out with Jacob, steady in the saddle, her hair tied back beneath her bonnet. She didn't flinch at long days in the dust, nor did she complain when her muscles ached at night. More than once, Jacob found himself pausing in the twilight, watching her move about the ranch with quiet determination. She was not the woman he had expected, but she was the woman he needed. One evening, after supper, she sat on the porch beside him, the stars glittering like scattered silver above. Her voice was soft. "Jacob, do you ever regret choosing me?" He leaned back in his chair, gazing out at the darkened fields. For a long time he didn't answer, and her heart clenched with fear. At last he turned to her, his eyes steady. Lillian, I don't regret a thing. You gave me more than I asked for. I thought I needed youth. Turns out I needed truth. And you've given me that every day since you stepped off that coach." Her throat tightened, tears slipping free. He reached for her hand, rough fingers folding around hers with surprising gentleness. And in that moment, under the wide Wyoming sky, Lillian knew his answer had not only silenced the town, it had given her a place she had thought she'd never find. A place called home. That winter tested every soul in Powder Creek. Snowstorms buried fences, calves froze in the fields, and neighbors struggled to survive. Jacob and Lillian fought together, hauling water when the pump froze, nursing sick animals by lantern light, splitting firewood in the bitter cold. Side by side, they endured, and when spring broke at last, their ranch stood stronger than before. By then, even the sharpest tongues in town had softened. Folks no longer spoke of scandal, but of the McKenna's resilience. They had become proof that marriage was not about age, nor appearances, but about grit, loyalty, and the kind of love that grew stronger with trial. Years later, when the story was told in hushed voices at church socials, it was not remembered as a tale of deception, but as the day Jacob McKenna gave an answer that left a whole town speechless. "I don't need younger. I need true."